Hi everyone, welcome to Pimp My Viz 3, Tokyo Drift. Yeah, let's get excited. I know it's a weird day for people, but we get to just be here and be really silly for a second. So let's just revel in that. My name is Jewel Leray. I am a product manager for storytelling at Tableau, which really has nothing to do with this presentation, but it's a cool title, so I'm going to share it with you. So before I was in that really cool title role, I was a member of the Tableau public team, which meant that I get to interact with the community all the time and learn lots of cool tricks that they do. So that's what we're here to do today. So before we get started, let me just give you a little intro video to whet your appetite. Oops. It will actually play.
So you wanna be a player, but your dashboard is shiz. You gotta hit Jewel up to get a pimped out viz. You got to pimp my viz. Damn right. You got to pimp my viz.
Fun fact, that was all made in PowerPoint. It's the only time transitions have ever been useful. So, we're here today because when I was a teenager, I watched way too much of a really amazing show called Pimp My Ride, which was a show hosted by rapper Exhibit, and he would come and show up at someone's house, take away their really crappy car, and he wouldn't just fix it. In fact, I actually heard that a lot of times they didn't fix the real problems with the car. What he would do is give it a really fly paint job and put spinners on it and like flames shooting out the tailpipes and like TVs in the headrest. And in the same vein, we're going to take some lackluster vizzes, and we're not going to make them adhere to visual best practices. We're just going to make them freaking ridiculous. So that's what we're here to do today. Now, why would I want to do this? So the thing about the tricks I'm going to teach you today, in the amount that you're seeing them, it's going to be too much. You're probably not going to want to build things for work that look like this. But you can take one or two of these tricks, tone them down, and then sneak them into your dashboards, and they'll make them a lot more engaging and user-friendly. And another kind of goal for this session is all of these things that I'm showing you today, I learned by following the Tableau public community, downloading other people's dashboards, and recreating them. So reverse engineering a viz is a really super useful skill, not just for learning new things like this, but how many times at work does someone make a dashboard and then they're not in charge of it anymore, and now you are, and it has all these calculations and weird stuff going on, and you have to figure out what it is. So we're going to try to build up those skills a little bit today by kind of talking through, if I was seeing this for the first time, how would I approach this? So, you guys ready for that? All right, so let's pimp our first viz. So the first viz we're going to do, it's actually, I'm kind of cheating, it's my own viz, because I just really wanted, now that I'm in product managing, I don't get to make vizzes as much, so I made one a long time ago and it was stupid, and I'm like, I'll just pimp it later. So the data is on Pokemon Go, because I made this back in August while that was still cool. And so there's a data set I created myself while playing Pokemon Go. Whenever I caught a Pokemon, I would open up this app called Reporter, which is an app for iOS. I'm sorry, I don't know any Android equivalents of it. And you can have it, you can program it to say whatever questions you want. So the questions I would ask myself, what Pokemon did you catch? How many combat points did it have? Is there a lure nearby? And were you using incense? So I'd ask those questions, and then it would automatically timestamp and geocode where that happened. So I was able to get location data and time data and see how many Pokemon I caught. So I put my data together and made this very simple viz out of it. So we have this line chart in the top left corner, which is just showing by day how many Pokemon I caught. And then we have the two pie charts if I used a lure or if I used incense. We have which Pokemon I caught the most and where I caught them. So it's fine. You can tell what happened. If you click on stuff on the line chart, it would take you to all of the stats for that day. You could see what I caught that day. It's totally workable. And really, it's not that ugly because Tableau 10, the new defaults are a lot nicer looking. It's a lot harder to make an ugly viz these days. But if I was someone who was interested in Pokemon and just looking and this chart pops up when I'm talking about Pokemon, I'm going to be like, what is this? I don't care. If I did like Pokemon, I might be more interested in something that looks like this. So this is my pimped out version. You can see I kept the layout basically the same because this kind of 4-quadrant layout that we've got going on is actually a really good layout, mostly because the thing I want people to interact with is the line chart. That filters everything down and tells you kind of the story of that day of playing Pokemon Go. You always want to put whatever is kind of the controlling aspect of your dashboard in the top left corner, because people, at least in the West, read top to bottom, left to right, and so that's going to be the first place they look. That's going to be where they start. I did some other things. Obviously, there's kind of a silly banner with just, you Google Pokemon font, and that's what happens, and then I put it on top of a Pokeball. The thing about doing design stuff is I'm not actually good at drawing things or really making anything. I'm just really good at Google image searching and then clipping things. That's all you really need to know. And I'll share some tricks and tools a little later on about how to make more banners like that. But adding a custom banner like that is something really easy to do. And there's a couple of benefits besides just making something that looks cool. If you're using Device Designer, which is one of my favorite new features in Tableau 10, if you have titles in there, the text doesn't resize even if you make it smaller. However, an image will. So if you make all of your titles and things like that into images, they will scale properly, whereas text, you just have to kind of start with a small font. So let's go a little more under the hood of this viz and see what else I did in here. All right, so here's the viz live. I think this was missing from the screenshot, but one of my favorite tricks, one of the first ones I ever learned, is a hover tooltip help menu. So you can see we have a little side duck here, and he's like, are you confused? I always am. And if you hover over him, it'll say what this data is, because people might not know what it is, and it'll give you some instructions. So click on a date in the line graph to see what Pokemon were caught and where. So this is a really simple trick. This is like one of the, hacks 101. Basically, all you do is you make a sheet. Oh, let's go to the sheet here. You make a new sheet, and I like to just write a little calculation called help. And usually that's just some kind of text stream like, I'm confused. And you drag that onto label. And on label, you can really make it say whatever you want. So either you can just make it have what your text string has, what your text string says, or whatever you want. And then I changed the mark to a shape and picked my little side duck. So that's all that is. And then you just clear out whatever's in the tooltip and write whatever you want. You can write a ton of information here if you want. I've seen really long hover help menus before. And if you were at Devs on Stage, you know that soon we're going to have more expressive text editing in the tooltips, and you can put all kinds of cool stuff in there once we have that. So I'm really stoked for that. Oh, hold on. My map is still messed up from yesterday. JK. Cool. So another thing, one of the more obvious ones we did, was we turned those bar charts into this pictogram. So instead of seeing just a bar that says drowsy on it, we see that on this day, I caught 7 drowsies. Because I live right next to a park. Actually, my Pokemon Go setup was real nice. Because I live on top of a Pokestop that's a candy store and right next to a park. And I got the guy who owns the candy store, I taught him what Pokemon Go. I was like, have you seen increased foot traffic around here today? And he's like, yeah, I don't know what that is. I'm like, let me tell you about Pokemon. Here's how you buy lures. It'll make people come here all day long. And he's like, okay. So for like 2 weeks, it was just, my house is constantly lured, which was great. But there's also, for some reason, Seattle is lousy with drowsies. And I don't know if that's social commentary on our really bad heroin problem. That was dark. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so let's talk about how to make a pictogram. So if I was coming to this sheet and trying to figure out what the hell is going on here, the first thing I might do is look at what's on columns and what's on rows. If you're trying to figure out what's going on in a sheet, that's usually a good place to start. So we can see that there's some kind of table calculation business over here. This is just what Pokemon it is, so that's pretty self-explanatory. So this must be the weird thing. And this is actually a calculation that, if we look at it, we can see this is the calculation. It's an if-then statement using a window sum and an index. So what this window sum is doing is it's adding up how many are supposed to be in that column, and then dividing it and saying which number is this one supposed to be. And then it'll keep drawing drowsies until you reach the number you're supposed to. And all of the tips and everything that I share here today will be reposted on my blog at jewelry.com and on the Tableau blog as well. So don't worry about having to take furious notes of things. It'll all be there. So yeah, the other things we have here are just some things that we have on the tooltips and the shapes. So let's talk a little bit about custom shapes. I have a folder in here that's called Pokemon Go, and it has all of my Pokemon Go characters. Putting custom shapes into Tableau is really super easy. All you have to do is find your My Tableau repository in your Documents folder, and then there'll be a folder in there called Shapes, and you can drop as many folders of shapes in here as you want. So you can see I have a couple different ones. I have some baseball logos. That's one that's probably not standard, and I have Pokemon Go. And the way these are organized, they're always brought into Tableau alphabetically. So it's a really good idea to have the names of your shapes match up with a dimension or measure that you're going to use to define what those shapes are. That way, if you have more than, like, say 10 or so, and you're sitting here trying to stare at these tiny little icons and match up the right one, you won't have to do that. If you know they're in the same order as the variable that you're attaching to, then you can just click Assign Palette and be done with it. So the other thing we have going on is we have a label at the very end saying the number in case you don't want to make people count all the way. So a lot of people don't know how much control you have over labels, but I've aligned these labels so that they're on the right, so that they're not going to cover up my beautiful Pokemon icons. And then all I did was say only label the maximum value, which means it would only label the one at the end, because otherwise it would label, the ones at the beginning too, and you don't want that. All right, another interesting feature of this is this map, which is substandard right now at this view. But if we zoom in, what you'll notice is that it looks a lot like the Pokemon Go map. So this is a custom Mapbox map that I made. And using Mapbox Studio is actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. If you go to mapbox.com, you can sign up for an account. And the accounts are free, and your maps are free basically up to a point. If it gets a certain number of views, then it'll just kind of shut down until you become a paid user. But for the most part, it's pretty hard to get there unless you're getting millions and millions of views. So this is my Pokemon Go map I made. If we hit edit here, we can see what this looks like. So the way Mapbox works is you add and edit layers at a time. So for this, I just followed, there was actually Mapbox created a guide to making Pokemon Go maps, which was very useful for me making this viz. So we have all of these layers here. We have roads, both major and minor, and for each one we have a texture file, so that's why it looks kind of, modeled there. And then we have the road major and the road case. So because in Pokemon Go, all the roads are outlined with this kind of yellow line, and I thought that was really important to the look, what we did is we took all of the road layer, that's a standard layer in Mapbox, and then I duplicated it and made another one called road case, where I just added a couple pixels on either side. And then you hide it underneath, so now it's just kind of a border around all the roads. And then we did the same thing with buildings so that we could have outlines of the buildings like that. And we gave special colors to the parks, because those are the most important things when you're playing Tableau, or when you're playing Pokemon Go. So once you create your Mapbox map, you can go back to where it is, and we can share it. So you go down here to share, develop, and use, and all you have to do is copy this URL. And then when we go back to Tableau, when we are in map, we can add background maps in map services. You just say add one, and there's a special place just for Mapbox ones. And all you have to do is paste that URL. Oops, not there. Paste that URL here, and it'll automatically fill in your API access token, your username, and your layer ID, and that's how you get a map in. Pretty simple. So the last thing we're going to talk about in this Pokemon Go one is device designer. So you might have noticed that over here on the left, I have a couple different layouts. So this is my standard desktop layout. I also have a tablet one, which is just a little bit narrow. I have it in portrait size. But I noticed that in the tablet, everything fit pretty much the same. The one thing I took out was the hover help menu, because hovering doesn't work super great on tablets. Like, I can sit there like this for a real long time. That tooltip's never going to come up. So I took that away. But we're definitely working with very limited screen real estate on a phone. So you notice if I go to phone, I took away a couple things, and something looks a little different. So I have a completely different bar chart for the phone, because when I made the original pictogram one fit in there, the icons got really, really small, and it was kind of hard to read. So what's the point of having adorable little icons if you can't even tell what they are? So I changed it to bars. Now, the way you can do this and have different vises on your mobile design than your desktop, so you'll notice when we're at the default here that bar chart is actually hanging off the edge here. So it's just barely on my dashboard by a couple pixels. I have it floating, and it's just barely on my dashboard by a couple pixels. So when it's actually published, no one's going to be able to see this. But since we can remove things from dashboards going down into the tablet and phone layouts, but we can't add things, this is kind of the trick to get things to be in there still. The other thing you could do is hide them behind something. So if you have things that are floating, you could put it behind. Just a way of kind of getting it in the dashboard without really getting it in the dashboard. So then I just took that one away and replaced it. That's a little trick. And then, like I said before, you'll notice that in all of my layouts, the header fully fills up the top, and so that's one of the big benefits to using an image instead of using text, because the text doesn't really resize right now. All right, so that's Pokemon Go. Thanks. All right, moving on. Let's pimp another viz. Okay, so the second viz we're going to pimp is about data breaches, because I just binge watched all of Mr. Robot, and this is what I want to talk about all the time now. So I found this viz. It's made on hacking. It's created by a guy named Mark Schondwant, I think is how you say it. I don't know, how do you say that letter that's like an O with a cross? It doesn't matter. It's actually pretty cool on its own. He kind of had a theme going of hacking terminals. And actually, if we take a look at it live, this is the live viz. He had some kind of cute little animated GIFs here. But let's be honest, it's 2016. If we're going to make a cultural reference to hacking, Matrix feels a little dated, people. So I wanted to do something else. But this dashboard was really cool on its own, so I wanted to start there, download it, and see exactly what he did. So let's take a look at what that process was like for me.
Hello, friend. I want to see how this dashboard works, so let's take a look and see what's underneath. Some animated GIFs. That's cute. Obviously, this guy knows a little something about pimping, but not quite enough. These HTTP addresses will break when the viz is embedded into an HTTPS site, like Tableau Public. So he's got 2 sheets on here. And if we take a look at his dashboard actions, yep, just as I expected. one dashboard action for the bars to bring up the appropriate story. He even made sure to exclude on clearing the selection so you don't see all the text at once. This guy is good, but he's hiding something. Let's go to this sheet. He formatted this pretty well, despite misspelling amounts. Want to see how? Let's click on the text. A lot of people don't know how much control you have over labels. Let's fix that typo for him. I still think he's hiding something else, though. Let's see his bar chart. There it is, a filter. He's only looking at hacks. There's a much bigger story here, and he's covering it up. Show all. Why would all those bars be the same length? Something is wrong. He's hiding something again. He's hiding the header. Let's see it. He has the axis locked. This guy likes control. Isn't that what everyone wants? To feel in control? Do I feel in control? Who am I even talking to? Wait. Are all those people really there and staring at me? Do you see them too?
So, that was a little kind of preview of what it's like in my head. Dark, scary place, despite my charming demeanor. So, what we covered there was just looking at what are the things that you look at when you're first trying to examine a dashboard. So you'll notice I went in here, I immediately was drawn to what's different about this. So his animated GIF stuff was different. And I can take a look at the layout tab and see, what are all the things that are in here. So I can see he has all of these objects. It looks like he laid out everything completely by floating. So all of these are just there. So he doesn't have any kind of layout containers or anything. And we can go to the dashboard tag, and anything that has a little check, that's how we know it's in the story. And then when we were on each individual sheet, we looked at, well, what's really on here? This is all just labels, and there's nothing on columns and rows. We looked at bars. We could see that there is another label here. So, like I said, I actually really liked the styling of this, despite it being, the matrix stuff. So in order to modernize it, I made it a little bit more Mr. Robot-y. Now, I know this looks almost exactly the same because, like I said, I kind of liked what he did. But the main trick here is, how I said, a hover help menu is one of my favorite tricks because I love being able to provide additional context for people. And I like being able to have a neat place to keep that stuff because sometimes we have limited space when we're working on a dashboard. We don't always want to take up stuff with a lot of clutter of filters and of extra text. So having a place to put it is really nice. But the hover thing doesn't always work because it's not great for mobile because you, like I demonstrated, cannot hover on that. So what we have here, if we click this little button, is a little menu that pops up. It pushes all my things to the right. And now I can come in here, change my filters, and I can see more info about this viz where I link to his original and give some instructions. So, how did I do this? I almost killed myself, and it was a huge pain in the ass. That's how I did it. So this trick I first saw from a blog post by the great Robert Rouse, who will be competing today in Iron Viz right after this. You should go cheer for him and for all the other guys. So this is his creating a collapsible collapsing menu container in Tableau. And it's pretty thorough. I really liked this part, which is really explaining what will happen. So the way this works is that we actually have three. We have a layout container. So if we go to the layout section, you'll kind of see how this is all laid out. You can see I have a horizontal layout container, and that has three sections in it. One section is a blank, is my blank sheet, and the others, this is holding all the menu stuff, and this is holding the actual data stuff. So right now, this whole section is floating, and you can see it's floating at -340. So it's actually just the same way that the bar chart on the Pokemon Viz was kind of hanging off the edge so you didn't see it. All of this data is hanging off the other edge, so you're not seeing it. If I were to make this not floating so you could see everything, this is what this would actually look like. We have kind of a blank space here, and if I click here, this sheet appears, and if I click the X, it disappears. So what this is actually doing here is that sheet, when it appears and reappears, that whole section of the layout container just goes away. And when it comes back and the sheet is there, it pushes everything to the side because now it's there. So to do this, really all I did was totally rip off Robert Rouse, and I downloaded this workbook. And I don't know if you guys know, but even with workbooks that are completely across data sources, you can always just take this and say duplicate sheet, or not duplicate, you can take this and say like copy sheet and paste it in a completely separate one, and it'll take not only all of the sheets and dashboards that are in there, but also the data set. And when Robert Rouse did this, he had made a completely separate data set to run this action. So that made it really easy. So his data set looks like this. It has a section called hide and a section called show, and that's basically it. So what we have is this line, the opening the menu is always set to show, and the closing icon is always set to hide. And those two things run a dashboard action that filter this blank. So if it's hide, it'll be hidden. If it's shown, it'll be shown. So it's a really simple dashboard action. It just looks like this. Oh, not that one, this other one. Close icon, menu icon, going on the blank. So Robert Rouse, he gave a really good explanation and made it really easy. The one thing he didn't say, the thing that I wish I had known before I was like, yeah, that seems like a good pimp, I'll do it, and really committed myself to it, is once you have, the only way this works is if the sheet disappears completely and takes all the space with it. The thing that'll keep it from doing that is if it becomes fixed width. So anytime you change the size of something, that fixes the width to that size. That means I was not allowed to change the size of that sheet at all, and the only way I could get it to fill up that space was by changing every other layout container on my dashboard. So just fiddling around with this and getting it the right width until the other thing kind of filled up the space. So it didn't work out perfectly. If I close this, I have like this tiny little gray line, which you can kind of see. And I had to just deal with it because my coworkers can only take so many hours of me swearing before they're like, Jewel, give it up. But then I got it, and I did a really obnoxious victory lap, and it was great. So some other things I did here, I changed all the text to just be green because it was bothering me that he had two different colors going on for seemingly no reason. Just keeping it consistent, keeping your design as simple as possible is always a good call. Adding some little images, always fun. I like it, put my little leet text in there. And this one I didn't make any mobile versions of, which I really would like to, but I was very distraught after that initial struggle with the layout containers and wasn't really super stoked to try it again on two other sizes. So that's the data breaches one. Thank you. So that's what it looked like after I was done. All right, so we still have a little time left. And like I said, I want this to be at least mildly useful for you, if not just mostly entertaining. So I thought I'd give you a few of my favorite little things you can do to your dashboards for just everyday pimping. So here's my list. My first thing that I will tell you is to use custom colors, because there's a couple reasons. One, well, the new color palettes in Tableau are particularly great, especially maybe one you might have seen with a really cool name called Jewel Bright. There's a lot of good color palettes, but you're not always going to find one that does exactly everything you want it to. And having your own kind of signature set of colors is a good way of setting yourself apart and having like that style that's yours. So I do a lot of rainbow stuff, which is why I made this special rainbow palette. And they put it in the product. Maybe if you're cool and you make something really good, they'll do that too. Putting custom color palettes in Tableau is actually really simple. All you have to do is find your, holy shit, okay. All you have to do is find your preferences.tps file. There it is right there. Open it up with a notepad kind of thing. Well, let's try this way. So in your preferences file, you can add these color palettes, and there's a tutorial online I'll link to how to do this. It's pretty simple. You just make a list of hex codes and put it in there. So there's a couple different kind of color palettes you can make. You can make an ordered sequential, which means that whenever you have a continuous variable, it'll flow from one of those colors to another. So I made a couple versions of Cube Helix, which is a scientific color palette that's used a lot. And you can see I have a lot of colors in there because I wanted to be very strict about how it flowed from one color to another. But if you're making just a regular type of color palette, which would just be called regular, all of those will just be little tiles in your color palette. There's a max of 20. You can't use more than 20 because Tableau is trying to make it so that we're using visual best practices no matter how many times I do pimp my viz. So you don't want to use more than 20 colors anyway. But you can see I have a lot of different ones in there. And yeah, it's a nice little way to get some more options there when you're formatting. The other thing we can do is do more with a marks card. So let's talk about that. Another way to kind of set your style and make it your own, I'm going to make this a little bigger, is to do more with a marks card. So you can see here I just have a couple normal charts, bar chart, bubble chart. This is actually data on my favorite radio station and what labels they play and which artists are on those labels. So that you can see this is an independent radio station. So the most of what they play are things that were self-released. And then because we're Seattle, they play a lot of sub-pop artists. If we go to this sheet, and again, we're going to take a look at some kind of reverse engineering things, you can see that header is gone. Because what I like to do a lot of times when I make bars is put a label on the bar, especially if I know the bars are all going to be long enough. This saves a little bit of space and just makes it so that your data is really the highlight of what you're looking at. In order to do that, we just put what would be the rows on label, and we align our text to the left. So right there, left aligned, and that's really all it takes. I also, especially if I'm going to do that, I tend to like my bars to be a little bit fatter instead of being kind of, their normal sizes like that. I just, I like them all nice and friendly together, cuddling up. You can also see I did some stuff with this marks card. One thing people don't realize is that you can sort bubble charts. So if I didn't do anything to this, my bubble chart would look like this. This is kind of how we're used to seeing bubble charts in Tableau, right? Like some kind of weird colorblind test that we all fail. But with just one simple step, all you have to do is pick what your dimension is and sort on it. And I'm going to sort, I like sorting by whatever is making the size, so that we're grouping the big ones together and the small ones together. So if I'm going to sort by the tracks played, descending, because that's what I have on size. If you're ever curious what someone has on what, these icons match up those buttons. So you can see this is track, that's on color. This is tracks played, that's on size. This is artist name, that's on label. So once we apply that, now we have all of our big ones in the middle and the small ones at the edges. And it's kind of nice when you have a lot of these because it makes a very pleasing, round, actual bubble. So that's just how you play with a marks card. Really important to do that. The third thing is creating custom headers, which you saw that I do that a lot, like this data breaches one or this Pokemon one. And they don't necessarily have to be this crazy, but just a lot of times just putting your text in an image has a lot of benefits, like I said, for mobile. And if you need a tool of something easy to use, I really like this online web tool called Canva, which everything is kind of drag and drop. There's a lot of free resources in it. And it's great because you can just drag an image here, make it nice and big. You can add filters. So like if I was making a coffee viz, I might want to put this as there. But that might be hard to read text over, so I could blur it out a little bit like that. Grab some text, put it on there. They've got, make this a little more legible here. So Canva is a really cool free tool to use. I use it for not just making headers, but making all kinds of little visual things I need. Yeah, so really nice, easy, free tool to use if you just need some quick images. Fourth, you should always, absolutely, always fix your tooltips, because if you don't, let me show you what it looks like when you don't, because I forgot to do it on this one. And doesn't that look terrible? Do you want to see all that information? Like right now, because I'm using crazy calculations in here, it's saying what the index number is. We don't want people to know that that's how I did this. So if you're not going to bother fixing your tooltips, just hide them. I'd rather see no tooltips than see ugly ones. But fixing your tooltips can be great, because like here, they're nice and clean, or in this KEXP one, a thing I like to do when I think about tooltips is I think about what does this point of data actually mean. So in these bars, every bar means a label. In these bubbles, every bubble means an artist. So I would take whatever that is and make it kind of the title of the tooltip. So in this case, we can see this is Merge Records, this is Sub Pop, this is 4AD. Whereas in the bubble, these are the artists, Crocodiles, Cheetahs, Mark Ronson, the OCs, etc. Another thing I like to do is if you have a short enough list of information you're trying to show here, try putting it in like a sentence. Try to use your data in a sentence. So we see here, Merge, 65 distinct artists played 1,841 times. That can be a lot more clear to someone who doesn't necessarily work with data a lot than seeing distinct artists 68, number played 1840. They might not understand that as much as they would understand this sentence. So yes, always fix your tooltips. The last pimp move that you can do is just always try to have some thoughtful interactions. So like what I was saying with the main dashboard design of keeping what you're wanting people to click on in the top left and having things funnel down, that's like a well-accepted practice now. So people will know that they should click here. And if they don't, make some interactions so that they do, like having a hover help menu telling them to do that, or a collapsible shelf saying maybe you want to click on one of those boxes so you can read about it. Having those kinds of interactions not just fixes the user experience, but makes it so that a person will spend some time with that viz. If there's something to do on that viz, they're going to spend some time with it. And if they spend some time with it, they might understand what it actually says better. They might internalize what it says better. So yeah, that is that. So that's my 5 tips for everyday pimping. Using custom colors, doing more with the marks card, creating custom headers, always, absolutely, forever fixing your tooltips. I will personally come and beat you up if you don't. And I know I look super intimidating, and you're all real scared right now. And thoughtful interactions. All right, I breezed through that really quickly, so we have quite a bit of time left for Q&A. Any questions? Anyone? All right, in the back. Sure, yeah, I totally forgot to talk about that one. So let's talk about the Pokemon chart that was just on the mobile version. So this one right here. This is basically my take on a lollipop chart. What we have is a dual axis. So we have the number of records, which is going to be adding up how many Pokemon are there. And we have two of them. One is creating the bars, and one is drawing the Pokemon. So whenever you have a dual axis, you're going to have multiple tabs here in the marks card. So you can see this is the first one. It's set to bars. This is the second one, and it's set to a shape. So I just put my what Pokemon on the shape, and it'll drop it at the end. And you just size it accordingly. Like these could maybe even be a little bit bigger, but then Drowsy's head is cut off. So yeah, so that's how you do that one. All right, other questions over there. So if you wanted to share custom images across an entire team, so whenever you download a workbook that has custom images in it, they'll be in there. They'll be in that workbook, so if you don't change anything, they'll be in there. But if you want to make sure you have all the libraries, the only way to do that is to have the folder in everyone's repository. But someone at Tableau created a tool once that I believe is still available. I'll find the link and put it in my blog post. That is a tool to download all of the shapes from someone's workbook. So if you see a workbook published, you can use this tool to get all of the shapes out of it. So if you want all my Pokemon Go shapes, you can have them. Other questions? Back there.
Did you get the numbers running on the side from the hackers?
Oh, so that was actually the original Viz did that. So what he did, and this is a trick that I actually showed in Pimp My Viz last year, is animated GIFs don't work natively in Tableau, but they will work if they're embedded on an HTTPS website. So if we download this guy's workbook, and this broke my computer last time because I think he was actually legitimately hacking me with this workbook, so we'll see if it doesn't. So we can, again, when you're trying to decode what's on a dashboard, going to the Layout tab. Yeah, see, this is what I'm saying. I think he's hacking me. I think he's hacking me right now. He's like, I can't believe you pimped my Viz. We go out to the Layout tab, and we can see what this container actually is. So this is a website that just has this image running, and he just floated all of his content on top of it. The trick, oh yeah, so we can see this. So yeah, this is the website here that you can see. This is what he's looking at. You can edit this URL and see what it is. So it looks like it's uploaded to some kind of WordPress site. And the important thing when you're using any kind of embedded content on Tableau Public or Tableau Server, whether it is images or like widgets of any kind, you need to make sure that the website is always HTTPS, because if it's not, all of this stuff just lives in a little blurb of JavaScript and an iframe. And if you're on an HTTPS site, it's meant to block out anything that isn't secured, meaning if you have objects on your dashboard that are HTTP, they're not going to work. So that's why you have to make sure it's HTTPS. He didn't have it like that originally, which is why I made fun of him in the original one. But then he figured it out. I'm like, oh, good job. I didn't even have to send you my video of my Viz for you to figure it out. Good job. All right, other questions? Yeah, back there. Sure. So when you're adding in custom shapes, the way that assigning a palette works is the shapes are brought in alphabetical order. So you can see the first one that we have at the top is Abra, and then Aerodactyl, and then whatever the evolved Abra is called. So when we look at our shapes in here, on our Pokemon Go shapes, we can see that's how they're organized here. So what I would always recommend is whatever is the dimension that goes along with your shapes. Like if you're using a different shape for every dimension, whether that be, maybe you're making something about sports teams or whatever, make whatever the title, like whatever the dimension says, the names of all of your files so that they're in the same alphabetical order. That way, when you hit assign palette, everything just lines up. I learned this doing my first Pokemon viz, which you probably saw a quick flash of in my intro video, and that was using all of the Pokemon at the time, which was 718. So you could imagine I wasn't about to sit there with 718 Pokemon going over and over again. That's when I learned the alphabetical trick. I also learned that the alphabetical trick also means that it's going to go 1, 11, 111. And so you have to put leading zeros if you're using a number, which is all of my Pokemon were, I was using the number of the Pokemon. So that's what I had to do there. Any other questions? Yeah, over here.
Besides Canva, is there any other online tools that you recommend?
For specifically for vision? Okay.
What other online tools do you use?
So I already said I love using Canva as a design tool. Another tool I use a lot when I'm doing Vizzing is a tool to get the data, which is import.io. That's the tool I talk about almost every year. I didn't this year. But it's one of my favorite tools. It's a web scraping tool. And they have a plugin that you can run just from your browser, but they also have, if you need something that's running for a couple hours, a desktop application. It's kind of the Tableau of web scraping. It's all very click, drag, drop. There's tons of tutorials that we've made in conjunction with them if you're interested in doing that kind of thing. But those are probably the two tools I use the most, other than just plain old Googling a lot of things. Because learning how to Google is really, that's like the key to pimping. The mapping software. So the way I made the Pokemon map, that was Mapbox. So Mapbox is fully integrated into Tableau. So that's why we were able to just go to the map and add it right in there by going to background maps, map services, etc. Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Anyone? Anyone? Do I have to do more tap dancing now? All right, well, we're going to end a little early, which I know everyone's super upset about because, we all love getting the full amount of time out of everything in conference. But before you leave, well, I'm not repeating this session again, but I will be in Tableau Labs all day tomorrow talking about data storytelling. So if you have things that you want to see us do with storytelling, come talk to me. And don't forget to complete your session survey in the app and tell them how cool and pretty and smart I am so that they let me keep doing this regardless of how silly and useless it is. Thank you.